What's up everybody, I am Lux Noctis and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to another episode of Lux Recommends. Today we'll be talking about Superhot. Yes, as well as being an apt description of my steely buns, Superhot is a first-person shooter with a time-bending twist, developed by the Superhot team. Initially created as part of a 7-day FPS challenge back in 2013, the game garnered a lot of interest because of its unique take on the genre, and successfully used crowdfunding to turn what was an in-browser demonstration into the fully fledged PC release that dropped in February of 2016. So, why do I think people should play it? Well, let's start with the obvious. The gameplay. Superhot's central gimmick is that time only moves when you do. Whilst that's not strictly true in actuality, it's pretty close. Time comes to an almost complete standstill provided the player stops moving, allowing them to look around in relative safety to discern enemy positions, bullet paths, weapon locations, and all that fun stuff. Stand around long enough though, and the shot that's on its way will still hit you, or get so close that it becomes impossible to avoid. What this means is that whilst there's a lot more time than you'd usually get to find your mark or decide where to go, allowing for the Matrix-style bullet dodging that sets this game apart, you still never lose that sense of urgency that makes a good shooter so engaging. What this mechanic also does is transform the standard run and gun gameplay into a more puzzle-like affair, where deciding on the order you dispatch your foes and which weapons you use to get the job done is just as important as being accurate with your aim. The tools at your disposal are limited to a handful of guns, a couple of melee weapons, your fists, and throwable junk. Whilst this may seem like a limited assortment, it's a tool set with almost no fluff, with the one notable exception being that the bat and the sword are exactly the same in practice, both being one-hit kill melee weapons that can also be thrown. In spite of that, I never felt I lacked options at any point in my playtime. Sometimes it's definitely a case of less is more when it comes to design. And it's always better in my eyes to do a lot with what little the game has, rather than bloat it with unnecessary additions. The final thing to touch on in this section is the hot swap ability. Introduced later in the game, it allows you to switch into the body of an enemy, but once used has a cooldown timer before it can be called upon again. This addition does a great job of keeping the play fairly balanced towards the close, when there are a ton more people aiming a lot more guns in your direction. It's practically a get out of jail free card when you're stuck in a position where death is imminent, but because the usages are restricted by the cooldown, and you're just as likely to hop into the path of a bullet as you are out of the way of one, it never felt like it made things too easy on the first run for me.
Super hot. Super hot. Super.
Alright, with our mechanics covered, let's briefly touch on the good and the bad, starting with the good. The time manipulation is unique. As far as I know, nothing else like Superhot exists right now. The quick reset allows for addictive try, die and repeat gameplay in a similar vein to Hotline Miami. The fact that you have to anticipate the position of enemies in motion means it's never too easy to pin down a moving target despite having the ability to practically freeze time and take aim, which in turn makes gaining a better understanding of where to shoot feel rewarding. Being able to slow motion jump allows for some awesome looking aerial gunplay, and having the ability to view and upload your run in real time once it's over really sells the whole Matrix-esque vibe and gives you a reason to go for the stylish approach. A minor gripe I had is that I always felt like I was making a compromise when it came to the control method I chose. I split my time about 50-50 between using a gamepad and using the keyboard and mouse. Whilst the mouse was easier to aim with, and the keyboard makes the chat sections, more on those later, feel more immersive because you get to mash on keys rather than hammer triggers, this setup has the downside of relying on the keyboard for movement. It's not a major issue, but keys are basically switches. You're either moving or you're not, which means that in practice, to move precisely you have to stop and start a lot. This lack of analog control is the reason Bethesda games have a key map to toggle between walking and running. And whilst I've never heard anyone else bring it up as a problem, I always find it a little immersion breaking personally. Having said that, whilst the analog stick on the gamepad does allow for that smoother movement, I still favour the keyboard and mouse in this case, both because of the more precise shooting and because of how well it fits the game thematically. Whilst I consider compromising on the control method a minor thing, and really something that's unavoidable in PC gaming anyway, the biggest issue with the gameplay to me was the wonky hit detection with the melee weapons. This may have been patched since I played, but I found that with an irritating regularity, point-blank swings with a bat or a sword would somehow miss the target. If you haven't played Superhot for yourself, you might be thinking that this wouldn't be a problem, because if time is stopped anyway, you can just swing again. But that's not quite how it works. Each time you pull the trigger, throw an object, or attack at close range, time hops forward a little to account for the amount of time it would take to perform the action. This meant that on a few levels in particular, I died repeatedly because of having to swing at the same target from the same position multiple times before one of the hits stuck, if any of them did, by which point I was either dead already or in a very unfavourable position. In a game where every moment that you're moving matters, those missed attacks really do make or break a run. I'd imagine it's a relatively easy fix, if it's something that hasn't been ironed out already, but it was definitely frustrating and made revisiting certain levels, especially in the challenge mode, feel way more tedious than it should have. The game does a lot to foster a sense of mastery as you grow more experienced with the mechanics and controls, and this one aspect unfortunately diminishes that. Even with a couple of negatives though, the gameplay is solid overall and enjoyable throughout, provided you aren't fruitlessly swinging a bat at someone. Now, let's move on to aesthetics. There isn't a huge amount to say when it comes to the visuals. The game's virtual reality world has a Spartan look, with locations being in grayscale, weapons in black, and the enemies in red standing in stark contrast to everything else. It's stylized, functional, fits well with the cyber theming, and it has the odd flourish here and there that stands out, such as the pleasing way the faceless red guys shatter when you hit them. The animations during the real-time playback aren't exactly up to par, but that's not a big deal, and I could see the basic look becoming stale over time. However, as the game is so short, I don't think that's going to be an issue for many players anyway. What I really enjoyed about the overall look though, was actually outside of the core game. Menus in the sections between levels look like you're running an old DOS machine, and this is where that greater immersion in using a keyboard and mouse that I mentioned earlier comes in. To talk about this properly, we need to get into why I thought it was worth making this video in the first place, and that's Superhot's meta-narrative. So, in Superhot, we play as some random asshole on a computer, which, at least for me, is just about as true to life as a game protagonist can get. We are given access to a cracked version of a new game by another player via text chat, and this is where the game proper begins. Now, I'm not going to tell you that Superhot has an incredible narrative, or even a coherent narrative, because really it doesn't. Having said that though, it's the way what little story is there is told that makes it worth a look for anyone interested in storytelling, particularly the interactive kind. Without spoiling too much, as always, what little we learn about Superhot.exe and the forces behind it is delivered to us through text and a loss of control. Whether it be receiving ominous messages, being forced into impossible to escape situations, or having our words replaced by things we never said, Superhot has ways of manipulating the player. Both the fictional one and to some extent, the actual one. It feels almost like the creators were trying to instill the sense of mystery one might offer the subject of a creepypasta, as though Superhot.exe were a file stumbled upon on the deep web and spread between curious users. And I think it really does succeed in capturing that feeling, whether it was intentional or not. At this point, it's worth mentioning that a game where you play as the player of a game isn't a stunt you can pull all that often, nor is it a completely unique premise, and it's only going to be less so after there are 100 Superhot copycats out there. It does feel fresh here though, and I've never seen it done better myself. Being hunched over a keyboard in a dark room, experiencing the escalation as the game builds to its conclusion is an intense and immersive experience. And the small, added touches, such as hammering away at the keys to respond to your friends in chat, do a great job of making you feel more connected to the world. And I imagine this aspect will only get better when VR headsets hit the market. When it was all over, I couldn't help but respect the level of confidence and self-awareness clearly at play. And you'll know what I mean by that when you reach the end. So what are you waiting for? Go try Superhot. It's the most innovative shooter I've played in years.
Super hot. Super hot. Super hot. Super hot.
Hello everybody, the video just ended, but now it's not ended because I am back for the end slate, doing the thing where I talk over it for the first time. Off to a flying start, as you can see. I hope you all enjoyed the video. I've got a couple more you can check out if you feel like it. Today I'm going to suggest environmental storytelling, a Bloodborne crash course. So that's a video, I guess pretty obviously, about telling a story through the environment. And we use Bloodborne as the example. So then you can do it yourself if you write things or make stuff. That's the point of that. I think it's one of the better videos I've done, so hopefully you like it. Second suggestion is a guest reading by Mr. Creepypasta himself. Good old MCP was nice enough to read something for me to upload on my own channel, but it's kind of flown under the radar because it's my channel and not his. So that story is called Suicide Note. I wrote it, he read it, it's exactly as cheerful as it sounds. So if you're into that, if you're into misery, then by all means, give that a look. And finally on the gaming channel, we have the Pokemon NPC mod in my Pokemon Kid video, which was super fucking dumb, but people seem to enjoy it. It went horribly wrong because the mod didn't work how I thought it did. There was a lot of screaming. I don't usually like to scream too much, but I screamed a lot. So apologies for that, everybody with ears. So last up, I guess I gotta, I don't know, pimp myself out or whatever. You can like and subscribe if you want, or don't. You know, I appreciate it, but just do whatever you feel like. I ain't the boss of you, you gotta live your own life. I can't be making all the decisions. I also started a Patreon a little while ago, but I made like one Twitter post about it, and that's kind of it. I'm at a nice round number of patrons now, which is to say, 0. But yeah, if you like what I do and feel like supporting me, that would be very helpful, but if not, then I respect your decision to refrain from giving a stranger money for some things he made. I completely understand that thinking. Most important is that you got something out of the video, so hopefully you did. If you've got any suggestions for future topics, feedback, anything at all, you can leave it in the comments, drop me a tweet. I always reply on the Twitters. I try and make a point to reply to everybody. So yeah, hopefully I'll catch you all around. See you next time. This was very, very rambly. I see why you do it, Yori of Wind. This is weird. I'm gonna go now. Goodbye.